Hello, I'm Jason Swain, as we say in Australia, g'day. Yeah, like I said, I've travelled a long way. I've been living in Kensington for 32 years, moved here in 92. I did come to America originally in 87 on a surfing trip with my brother to Hawaii, because that's all we thought about was surfing and girls. And I kept a lot of people's addresses from the mainland back then and corresponded over the years, and I landed back in the States in 88 and had a 6-month visa. Basically just bummed around for 6 months out west, a lot of tours, drove around an old bomb for a few months, and I had a friend that I'd met in Hawaii who lived in Kensington, and kept her address. And my brother came out, he says, "Hey, remember that girl you met in Hawaii? She lives near Washington. Let's just go have a look at Washington." So fair enough. So we flew out here and basically lobbed on their doorstep and said, "We're here for a couple of weeks." So they put us up here, put us up in the actual house I'm living in now, and looked at Washington, New York. Anyway, I ended up dating my wife is Annette, who I met at the time. We were dating at the time, and then we went back and forward between Australia and the States about 3 or 4 times, and did a lot of road trips, cross-country trips to the US, and then finally it became sort of too expensive to be dating each other. We had to decide one country or the other, so I drew the straw and I decided to come to the States, because at the time Australia was there wasn't a lot of work around, and I thought, well, it'd be good just to spend a few years over there and come back to Australia later. Well, 32 years later, I'm still here, so things just sort of worked out that way. As far as the artwork goes, I have no artistic background whatsoever. Never took art in school, barring like drawing cartoons with my teacher in class. I was terrible at schoolwork. My teachers were glad to get rid of me. They said, "You'll never amount to nothing." And I stayed in touch with these teachers over the years, and they said, "You're still doing cartoons?" And I showed them some of the artwork, and they said, "Oh, I guess you did. I guess you became an artist." Well, I never took lessons. I just sort of looked over the shoulders of people. I had another Australian guy I met in San Diego who was a famous impressionist artist, and he gave me a few pointers. I just sort of absorbed different techniques from a lot of different people, because I can never read a book and information just doesn't go in. I'm sort of like your poster child for ADD. I could read the same thing 20 times and it would not stick, but I could do things with my hands and do it straight away. So painting sort of became a thing. I originally did first portrait I did was mostly of dogs, and I sort of cut my teeth doing people's pets. And funny story about that, I was doing people's dogs, and this is a story some people may have heard. Every time I painted someone's dog, the dog would pass away within like 2 weeks. And this happened about 7 times in a row. And so I got pretty good at doing dogs, but the problem was I didn't let on that this was happening. It wasn't a real good marketing thing for doing dogs. And I got a job, and a fella gave me a picture. He said, "You think you can paint this?" And it was a picture of Bill Clinton and his dog Buddy sitting in the rose garden. And I said, "Yeah, sure, I can paint that." And turns out this fella was a close associate of the Clintons. So I painted it. And I said, what do I do with it? So he said, "We'll send it to their office in Harlem," which I did. So I went down here to the Kensington post office and mailed it. Well, between me getting from the post office to my house, Buddy got run over by a truck within 10 minutes of me sending it. And so I was like, not again. And so I went home, and my wife told me what happened. And so I got contacted by the Clinton Foundation to sort of verify who I was. And anyway, once that all happened, President Clinton sent me a nice letter and said that he missed Buddy, and I didn't tell him about the past dogs I'd just killed. So that's hanging up in the house in Chappaqua somewhere. But yeah, going back to moving here, I originally wasn't going to stay here for that long. I was going to stay for about 5 years and then go back. But of course, when I got into artwork, it just sort of, I probably couldn't have become an artist in Australia just because it just doesn't have the market, the people, and the attitude out there is like, yeah, it's a good hobby, but stick to your day job. It's sort of like that. You don't get encouraged too much. But here is just such a big market, and I found in the States it's amazing. You can specialise in anything, and people will find you. Like I was just doing dogs, and I got calls from people doing dogs, and then it got to horses and other animals. And then I got a call for someone to do people? And I said, oh yeah, sure. And I hadn't done anyone at all. I just, it's like dogs, people, same. So, and luckily it came out. I mean, I just sort of, for me it was practice. I never really had any special technique. I just made all the mistakes you can make with portraits. And just kept at it because I could never keep my mind interested in anything for longer than 5 minutes. But painting I could. I'd sit out there for hours. Sometimes I'd paint for 5-6 hours straight. Sometimes I'd paint for about 5 minutes just because of the attention deficit thing. I'd go out there and I'd find something else that occupied me. But I did a lot of surf. I surfed a lot when I was young. We used to go to the beaches a lot. We grew up near the Pacific Ocean. Basically, the ocean was there. You either surfed or you fished, or if you lived in the bush, you were into farming. But I mostly surfed, and that's why I missed a lot of school. I still remember going down to the surf, and the teachers would come down with a station wagon and load up the surfboards. And it's like, you know the drill. Back to school, get detention. And then I got into statues later on. I had a tree I took down at my house, and I thought, I'll see if I can do something. Once again, I just, lost interest in painting for a little bit. I got into carving, so I did sort of like a totem pole in my front yard, and that was back in like 2006 or 7, and people were walking past it. Do you do that for a living? I said, no, I don't. And so I got a couple of jobs doing that. Well, this is pretty cool. And actually, the town of Kensington, there's an eagle down here on Connecticut and Baltimore that I did. And that's actually the third one. The two before that had rotted out. But the first one I did was an eagle that was in March of 2008. And the weird part about that was David Gregg, who was a local tree guy here, he got me the log and we took it down there. And I was getting ready to do it, but then sadly my niece was killed in a car accident. And so I had to rush back to Australia, came back and did it after that, and we sort of got the little plaque there with my niece's name on it. And she was sort of the, one of the inspirations for my artwork, because she wanted to be an artist as well. And the weird part was she sent me a picture of a kangaroo she'd drawn in school, and it said "Kangaroo" by Katie. And there's a lot of weird things that happen in your life, but the weird part about it was when I first got to America and I got my green card, the first job I had was a bartender at Kangaroo Katie's in Greenbelt. That was my first job. So just sort of a weird thing there. So I've worked several jobs. My background mostly was in horticulture. When I first left school, I did horticulture, I did landscaping. I worked numerous jobs. I worked at the Brisbane Airport as an aircraft detailer. I actually got a private pilot license when I was doing that. I haven't kept that up, of course. And then I was a taxi driver in Australia for about 2 years, doing night shifts for my auntie. My auntie owned a taxi in this sort of resort area, and my uncle had passed away and she needed someone to run the taxi, and I was only 21 years old, and so I was the youngest taxi driver in the area, but I was sort of just given this job to manage this taxi at 21. So I was doing like night shifts, mostly picking up drunks and getting out of fights. I'm going to get in a lot of fights, and it was a pretty hard living. I did that for about 2 years, and that was just prior to me moving here, because my wife had come out and visited me while I was still driving taxis, and I just said, I've had enough, I'm done. It was a hard living. So I came in the summer of '92, started doing construction, and waiting for my green card, of course, which took a few months, getting that all done. And then the artwork's just sort of, I moved to San Diego for like a year in '95, and that's where I met this Australian guy who was a painter who got me back into artwork, and I sort of decided to seriously pursue it. And I just, I'd work my regular job and then I'd go and paint for a few hours at night time just to get practice in. And there's always something you just keep picking up from the last painting. But I've sort of been in these weird situations all through my art career, just a lot of weird stories and coincidences. Like Steve Irwin, who grew up in the same area as me, the crocodile hunter. I'd seen him surfing a few times when I was out, so he was a good surfer. And, we'd said good day a few times, and we knew his zoo when it was small. It was a little thing on the highway, had just a handful of animals. Maybe 10 cars a week would come through there, and he nearly closed down. And then he got married to Terry in Oregon and went back to Australia and shot the pilot for that Crocodile Hunter series, and it took off. Anyway, his zoo just grew, so he went from having 10 cars a week to about 20 buses a day, just big. And he had the big show on Discovery Channel. Well, the day he got killed by the stingray, I was surfing actually in North Carolina. It was Labor Day 2006, and I got a call from Australia from my sister. My brother-in-law worked for Steve at his zoo. He was a welder, and he said Steve just got killed by a stingray. And I thought it was a joke. And so anyway, so for me, I had this old, rusty old blue van, which you might remember the old blue van I had. I'd painted a portrait of Steve on the side of it. So I'm driving around town with a Steve Irwin portrait, and just so happened someone from Discovery, which used to be in Silver Spring, saw the van and said, what's your association with Steve Irwin? I said, well, I've been surfing with him a few times, and he grew up in my town. So they sent me a CD of pictures they said we want to do a mural for the headquarters in Silver Spring. So I went ahead and painted it. It was a big one. This is a smaller print of that. The original is actually about 6 feet by 5 feet. And so I painted it, and halfway through the painting, I get an email from Discovery Channel saying, we've changed our mind. We want to do something different. And I said, well, I'm halfway through the portrait. I've got to get this thing done. And they said, well, sorry, but, of course, there was no written contract, which I kind of learned about later. So I went ahead and finished it. Anyway, I called Strathmore, just by chance, in Rockville. And I said, I have a Steve Irwin portrait here. I said, would you be interested in displaying it for a couple of weeks? I said, I'm going to have it rolled up and sent to Australia. Luckily, a construction company called, over there they're called Lend Lease. They teamed up with an American company called Bovis. And they said, listen, we want to get this thing to Australia. We'll pay for your framing and shipping to get it out there. So that was covered. So I went ahead and finished it. It went on display at Strathmore for about 3 weeks. Well, we had a bunch of people come through, and anyway, I get a call from the Washington Post. And they said, Mr. Swain, we understand you did the Steve Irwin portrait. We'd like to do a story. So I went out there and met them, and they said, what is Discovery's involvement in this? I said, well, funny you asked. I said, you might want to ask them. So I said, there's been none. So they called Discovery Channel up, and Discovery Channel was not too happy. And come to find out that Discovery Channel was one of the sponsors of Strathmore. So it ended up this big feud about this portrait, which, no publicity is bad publicity. So it ended up in the front page of the style section of the Washington Post. Anyway, I'm out working doing landscaping. I get a call, and it's the CEO of Discovery. And his name was Clark Bunting. And he was the one who actually started Steve's show. And he said, Mr. Swain, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. And I said, well, not on my part. I says, I've got the emails to prove it. If someone told me to do a painting, I've done the painting. He said, no, don't worry about that. So anyway, he paid for my plane ticket to Australia to deliver the painting. So I met the painting out there, and this thing ended up just blowing up. We had local stations. They actually Steve used to have a show at the stadium. He had a stadium that seated about 4,000 people, and the crocodiles would come out underneath the stands in a big pool, and they'd let the crocodiles out. And they said, well, before we start today, we've got a special presentation. Steve's portraits come here from the States, and they brought it out through these big double doors. It ended up being a big thing. So my mother was more worried about me getting too much publicity. She always thinks someone's going to bump me off. I don't know. It's like, just stay away from the cameras. So anyway, they ended up pretty big. So there's been a few happenings like that through my art career, and not just by chance. And I sort of make a point of always talking to people and spread myself around a fair bit, and talking to people of all sort of backgrounds. And the work I get is from the weirdest angles. It's just never any, I don't do galleries. I've never done gallery shows. I just don't like the idea of giving up 45% of my money. That's what they take mostly. Then I got into, the wood carving has always been there. I find it challenging because it's three-dimensional. Two-dimensional for me is easier than three-dimensional, because especially with animals, I was always fascinated with birds. I had bird charts. I had all the bird books when I was a kid. My cousins owned big shrimp boats, and I would go out working with them when I was a kid. And there's just birds everywhere, and I'd have my bird charts out. While they're trying to do work, I've got my bird charts out, and they were pretty rough. My cousins were, typical fishermen, And I remember one time my cousin John came out and he says, Jason, what are you doing? I said, I'm just checking out these birds. He's like, what's that? I said, that's an Australian gannet. He goes, no, it's not. I said, what is it? He said, it's a bloody seagull. So everything was a seagull. So yeah, I was fascinated. So I always do a lot. I do a lot of birds. I do a lot of eagles, hawks. I just did this cheetah not too long ago. It's from a piece of, it's from a piece of maple. So I hate wasting wood too. I see all these nice trees getting cut down. I always try to save the logs and take them back to the shed. And I use about 4 different chainsaws at different stages, the big ones and then smaller ones. By the way, this is my family. That's me, of course. My older sister, she's the oldest one. That's my older brother, younger sister, and my 2 parents. Sadly, my father just passed away about 4 months ago. I hadn't been back to Australia for 5 years, and I went and stayed with him. And I came back here, and about 3 days later, he'd passed away of a stroke. And I hadn't seen him for 5 years, so it was just kind of weird that happened. So we're sort of helping my mother out at the moment. But yeah, I should have had this thing on slide while I was. Let's see if I can go down to the menu here. That's good. Let's see if I can. No. Anyway, let's change it. I don't want to do that. I'm trying to get to a menu. Tracy, you might know this one. Anyway, I'll keep talking. Another kind of, I got into military stuff. I got into military portraits. I was given a project by the Australian military. All the guys that were killed in Afghanistan, there was about 42 guys from Australia that were killed in Afghanistan, and I started this project of painting the portraits and then sending them back to Australia, and then the families of the soldiers would get the portraits. It took a bit of doing because there's a lot of privacy issues with soldiers. And once they figured out that I was legit, they would send me pictures out and I would paint them and send them back. And then a local, depending on where the families were, they'd have an art store that would stretch them and frame them for me, and then we'd present it to the families. And there's about 42. I've done 36 so far, but it's taken me about 10 years to do it. It just depends on the family. Some families didn't want to do it, some did. And it was funny because we had a big event in Australia. It was called the Families of the Fallen Dinner, and I had at that time about 8 portraits finished. And they said, we're going to meet at City Hall in Brisbane. And this thing ended up being pretty big. We ended up having the General of the military come out. We had the Governor General of Australia, which is basically the representative of the Queen. She came, and we had a big dinner, and we had a presentation of the portraits and meet and greet of the parents. And that's still ongoing. I just did one about 3 months ago. It was the last one I've done. I've got 4 more to do. And that sort of branched out into other things too. Local police have me do their dogs when they either pass away. I don't paint them first. I let them pass away first. then I paint them. And I've done a fair few of that. There's been there's so many stories. I remember I went to New Jersey. I got a call from New Jersey. It was a little town called Vineland in southern New Jersey. And a fellow had come from Afghanistan, and he'd been separated from his dog, and they finally found his dog and reunited him with his dog. Well, sadly, about 6 weeks later, after he was reunited, the dog walked across the street and went under a bush and died. Had passed away. I hadn't painted it. No, I didn't paint it. And so I got a call from Vineland because they'd seen a story of a police dog I'd done in Alexandria. So I did the portrait. They said, "Oh, can you send it up?" I said, "Well, I'll bring it up." So I drove up to New Jersey, and we had a big conference room, and we had the portrait sort of like this, but behind a curtain. And they said, "Oh, Corporal McGee, could you come to the office?" So we're sitting there with all the superintendents of the police, sitting around this table, and this poor guy comes in, and he looks in the door, and he thinks he's in trouble. And he goes, "Is everything?" What's that? Speak louder. Okay. Yeah, so he was kind of worried that he was in trouble. So he came through the door, and they said, "Could you take a seat?" He took a seat. You could see he was sweating. And they said, "Do you know this guy here?" And they're pointing at me. And he's thinking maybe he'd arrested me or something like that. And he said, "No, I can't say I know him." And he said, "Well, he's got something he needs to show you." No, he's just like, "My God, so what is this?" So they took him back, and we rolled the curtain back, and it was him and his dog, a picture of him in Afghanistan with his dog with his military gear on. So he was more relieved than anything else. That it was just a picture, he wasn't in trouble. And that led to other work locally up there in New Jersey, and then of course with Alexandria Police, some of the Montgomery County. So basically when their dogs would pass away or be retired, they would call me up and get a portrait done. These paintings here, the sort of sepia tone photos, these are actually made from coffee. So what I do is I'll get coffee, and I get the powder, the ground it up, and I boil it, and I'll use different, light roast, medium roast, dark roast, depending on how long I cook it. And so it's like watercolor, but it's coffee. And I'll use it on canvas, and I use canvas that's not primed, but it has to be raw, so the coffee will soak in and sort of disperse. And that came an idea from my nephew, who works in a coffee shop, and he basically decorated the store with all these sheets of coffee images. And I thought, well, maybe I could do portraits with them. And that led to another thing with doing coffee shops. I'd go to a coffee shop and hang, a dozen paintings or so for about a month. Then I'd move to another coffee shop and sold quite a few of them. I just do sort of like mostly popular culture, American popular culture, famous figures like that. And it sort of just became another discipline, and it actually helped me with my oil paintings because you sort of have to work quick, and it forced me back into looking at most of the secrets of painting is getting the color values. You can use any colors, but if the values are wrong, it looks kind of weird, but that's what coffee did. I've only got 2 colors, basically. It's just different tones, and that's what sort of forced me back into, it actually made my oil paintings better by doing coffee paintings. The Obama portrait, that's another story. Started off as a small project. I was going to do something small at a local school, which is Oakland Terrace. And they said, well, let's do something big. So I brought this canvas in, and they said, oh, we wouldn't figure on that big. So I had like a little ladder. I'd work on this ladder, and the kids would sit sort of a room like this. Lunchtime, they'd watch me paint. And this was actually just prior to his inauguration. And we had contacted the local senator to come and sort of unveil it when it was finished, but we never got any response. And this went on for a number of weeks. Anyway, finally we started getting interest from the national networks, Global News Canada, Fox, CBS. They all wanted to come and do a story on it. And all of a sudden I get a call from a local senator that he wants to come and do a story. I was like, all right, I see how this works. And so he came by for the official unveiling, and I get a call from an Australian news network, which is sort of like you have Good Morning America here, we have Good Morning Australia there. They wanted to do a story, so they actually came down here to the town hall. We had it set up here like this, and then I went down to the mall the next day to the Bleachers. We did a sort of a live setup from here to Australia, so there was a morning show there, but it was afternoon here. And that went live, and it was so funny because the national network, it went countrywide, and the local affiliate where my parents lived heard about it, and they wanted to come to my parents' house and sort of sit in on them watching me on TV, which is kind of weird, like they're watching me and they're watching them. And I remember my dad said, he says, you know what, because my dad had no filter, he was as rough as they come. He says, them buggers better not come in and put the camera on the back of my head. He was just obsessed about this. He said, I don't want to see that camera on the back of my head. Well, you see the film come out, the first thing you see is the back of his head. It's like, he was so hot. That was unbelievable. He was mostly annoyed about that. So I interviewed them one at a time. You know, they went down the line. They're sitting in the lounge room watching me talk on TV, and they said, they asked my mother first. They said, Mr. Swain, did Jason ever show any sort of artistic talent when he was at school? And she said, well, you know, if you ask any of Jason's teachers, they all thought he was quite useless. This is on live Australian TV, and I could see my sister sitting there going like this, you can't say that. And then they asked my dad, they said, hey, so Mr. Swain, what do you think? He says, about what? There's just like, whatever, you know. So, you know, after that I got so many calls and emails from Australia. I was like, what the hell are you doing on national TV? I said, you got no idea. I said, it just started from a small little project here at Oakland Terrace. And so the Obama Library is actually interested in this painting, but we're sort of playing a bit of cat and mouse with them at the moment, because one thing is they want it for free. And I was like, it doesn't quite work that way. And there's a lot they want to verify it and all that. Oh, we've got to verify, is there any sort of paperwork that goes with it? And I said, I've got all that, you know, whatever you want, I've got it. So I got an email about 2 weeks ago from them saying they're still interested in it. So you know, what they're doing is they're waiting for me to say, you can just have it. And I was like, it's not going to happen. So, you know, it's not like they haven't got any money. Other sort of stories about, but yeah, I sort of just been lucky. I've been fairly lucky with artwork, just to sort of fall into different situations where just a lot of weird things happen, just coincidences that, you know, you can't sort of put your finger on. Sean Taylor, who was with the Washington Redskins, who had got killed in Miami, I decided to do a portrait of him. And the same size as Steve Irwin's, it was a big one. So I painted it, and Children's Hospital in Washington was having an art show. And I said, I'm looking for entries. So I said, I've got a Sean Taylor portrait if you want to hang it there. And they said, oh, sure, bring it down. So I brought it down, and it stayed there for a few weeks. And I was going down there to pick it up. And they said, well, any chance you can keep it here for another couple of weeks? We're having a fundraiser with the Redskins next week. We'd like to sort of have it here as a display. And I said, oh, sure. So I left it there, and all the Redskins come down. So we've got photos of me with the Redskins on the stage with this big portrait of Sean Taylor. So I was approached by the Redskins. They said, would you like to... we'd like to hang your portrait at FedEx Field. And I said, okay. So they asked me what I wanted for it, and I told them. So I was getting emails, back and forward emails with them. And I get an email saying, would you be willing to donate it? And I said, yeah, I'm just an artist. Artists, I guess artists are not supposed to make a living. And I said, no, I can't give it away. I said, tell you what, because what I was going to do, I was going to sell it, and I was going to give half the money to Children's Hospital. So their deal was, you give it to us, we'll make a donation on your behalf. And I said, that sounds fair. I said, so you get the tax write-off and a free portrait. Yeah, but it hangs at FedEx Field. I said, how about this? I said, if I gave it to you, can you give me the rights on the prints? If I could print it up and sell prints. Weren't interested. I said, okay, well, deal's off. I said, yeah, I'm going to sell it. They said, well, if you intend to sell it, you need to take all of the logos off the painting. You need to remove the NFL, you need to remove the colours, whatever. I said, that's not happening. So they were sort of motioning like they were going to threaten some sort of legal action. Well, funny thing was, Washington Post got involved again. And they said, we've seen your portrait, and what's the story on it? So I told them. And actually, one of the players came up, a fella called Santana Moss, and he wanted some prints of it. He wanted big custom prints done. And so I gave him a price, which I seemed fair, and the problem with a lot of these players is they get a lot of free stuff. And I think he didn't really want to pay for it. So he got a mention on the news article as well about wanting a free painting. So Greta, I'm not sure if you remember a lady by the name of Greta Cruz, but she worked for WJLA in Washington. Anyway, I was out playing golf, and I get a call, and it's Greta Cruz from WJLA. Say, Mr. Swain, could you do an interview? And I said, when? She's like, now. And I'm on a golf cart. I'm up at Little Bennett. We're flying over the hills, just steaming back to the clubhouse. So I raced off. I come up my street, and there's like TV towers in front of my house. All the neighbours were outside, thought something had happened, like I'd kill someone. It's like, no, I'll explain later. So we did an interview, and luckily Greta Cruz was pretty savvy about art stuff. She knew about prints, she knew how things, and she sort of pressed the Redskins on it. She called them up and said, and what they were trying to do, they were trying to make out like I was extorting money off them. And she said, well, no, hang on. She's like, we've got the emails, we've got the, all that to prove it. Anyway, they just sort of said, oh, forget about it. We don't want to be on the news. They were trying to stop the story from coming out. And, but it came out anyway. At 6 o'clock news, it came on. And so I sort of basically went into hiding for about 3 weeks because I knew something was going to happen. But anyway, I got calls from people saying, are you selling prints of this? And I said, well, I can't really sell prints. I'm kind of legally, but anyway, we all met at this place called Dave and Buster's in Rockville, and I got orders for about 50 prints of this painting. So it's sort of made up for what I didn't get from the Redskins. So I kept the original. So I'm hoping now with new ownership that down the road it might end up there anyway. But I've had a lot of sort of weird controversial things like that happen, which at the time was kind of a bit scary, but it sort of kept me in the game of artwork. I just kept painting and getting orders for stuff. Another controversial, funny story was a statue in Silver Spring. It was a big 10-foot oak tree, and a guy wanted to do some eagles. He was an ex-military guy. So went out there with chainsaws and scaffolding and started cutting this log up. Well, Montgomery County came by and said that, someone was complained and wants you to get rid of this log. The log was sitting there for a couple of weeks. And he said, well, I'm having a statue done. And it's like, well, does a guy have a permit? And I said, I don't know you need a permit to do artwork. I mean, anyway, it was set off it wasn't on the right of way, it was set on his property. And he said, can you do a contract real quick? So I did a contract and said, I'm going to do this. It's going to take me 3 months. They said, well, we'll give you 3 weeks. And every day over 3 weeks, we're going to charge the owner $700 a day fine. So anyway, I was like, man, this is terrible. So what am I going to do? So I called up, I had a friend who was the president of Vietnam Vets of America in Silver Spring. I say, mate, this guy here, he's ex-military. He's doing a statue, and the Montgomery County's giving him a hard time. And he says, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of it. It's all right. Anyway, he called someone from local media again. So WSA calls me up, said we would like to meet you at the log. And it's okay. So I'd already had some of the eagle cut out. And a lady came by, she set up the cameras, all the Vietnam vet guys came and they're all on this property. And it was amazing. It was like we were sitting there like, what's going on? And so we're live in Silver Spring, with WSA, and it's like, we're here. And anyway, while she's doing the interview, the phone's ringing, and it's Montgomery County. So is there something we can do? It's like, yeah. It's like, you can watch the news tonight, and the story comes out. He was trying to stop the story. He's like, well, no, there seems to be a misunderstanding. We didn't say he couldn't do it. And she said, what about the fines and all this stuff? Anyway, the story went ahead. Anyway, so they dropped all of their interrogation and then dropped all the... So it went ahead. So that statue's still down there. It's off Colesville Road down there in Silver Spring. But yeah, it's funny because every time these stories pop up, I send them back home to Australia, and the family's got the same old attitude. It's like, oh, not that bugger again. So, can't you stay off the TV? But for me, it's been a very rewarding career. I mean, I've probably quit about 1,000 times. It's just one of those things where I'll go out there and I'll just hit a brick wall sometimes, or I won't get some work, or something's gone wrong on a job, and it's like, that's it, But next night I'll be out there painting again, doing the same thing. I'm going to try and get a slideshow of these pictures. Oh, first of all, these statues, these are all just like different local cuts of wood, maple. This is actually a little Leland cypress that came down right over here on, what's his name, Spencer's house. Yeah, that's from his tree. And also from that eagle is from his tree as well. Different woods are good. I'd try to stay away from oak. Oak is sort of temperamental. It wants to split on you all the time. I mean, it's great firewood, but doesn't make good statues. And this is all coffee. This is Tony Bennett, of course, Elvis. So I brought the map because where I was located, I was born in Brisbane, which is basically central east coast of Australia. So 85% of Australia lives from here to there on the coast. There's just absolutely nothing in the middle, except for Perth on the west coast. The middle is completely... There's a few towns here and there, but probably if you took Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane out, you've got nearly half of a population in 3 metropolitan areas. So those areas are very urbanised. It's very large. I mean, the Australian continent is about as large as the US continent, the continental US anyway. So it's quite large, but very dry in the middle. A lot of things that can kill you, animals, and when we went to school in Australia, we sort of got taught about what to avoid as far as things like snakes and stingers and that in the water. I remember when I lived on a horse farm for a while, and we had, often had snakes, especially brown snakes, which were deadly. You'd go out there sometimes and lift the hood of the car, and there'd be a snake crawled up in the motor, trying to keep warm, or it'd be in your mailbox, sometimes in the mailboxes. So you just sort of knew where to look. And when you're a kid, you sort of just learnt these things at school, because it was just, otherwise at some stage you were going to encounter these animals. And in the water, of course, you've got the stingers. You've got blue-ring octopuses, you've got stonefish, you've got the box jellyfish. A lot of people think of sharks in Australia, but there's a few attacks, but most of the stingers are the more dangerous things. But I've been lucky. I've never really encountered them. I've seen them, but I just haven't really had occasion to close calls with them at all. It was a great place to grow up. We had a very sort of a simple lifestyle. My parents always, skied about the fact when they were married, they had back then we were in British currency. We changed over in 1966 to Australian currency. We had pounds and sterling and all that when we were before 66. And my parents always said when they got married they had 34 pounds when they were married, and I've always heard about that 34 pounds for the rest of my life. But yeah, no, it was a great lifestyle. Very simple. We lived in the bush. We lived on tank water. Basically, the water would come off the roof and go into a big tank, and none of it was filtered. We just drank it straight out of the tank. my father was into racehorses. He was actually nearly became a professional jockey at one stage because he was small. My father was about 5'3", so he almost became a jockey. But he was a body worker on cars, and he did that. My father was lucky; he retired fairly young, and luckily, he enjoyed about a 30-year retirement, which was, he got to potter around for a few years. He was lucky; he kind of invested in property in Australia that back in the day was worthless, but became, because it was near the beach, became valuable later. But as far as, I was trying to get this screen going, there's a whole bunch of pictures I need. Hey Tracy, can you help me with this thing? I know I've got no tech savvy whatsoever. I'm trying to get to my menu of pictures. It's yeah, I do. Right here.
All right, you keep talking.
All right. But as far as moving to the States, it was a bit of a culture shock. I mean, I'd seen American culture on TV. We actually learned American history in school in Australia, so I had a little bit of an idea. I didn't know anything about any of the sort of the political stuff or anything like that, and I didn't really care to. But the history, I was always fascinated with American history because she's basically been, whenever America or England went to war, Australia went to war because of the Allies, and there was always the stories of the American soldiers when they came to Australia and vice versa. And I've always made a point to stay in touch with a lot of I have a lot of friends who are still World War II veterans who are still alive. Oh, there you go. I'm not sure if that's clear to you at all because there was some glare on there somewhere. Yeah, that back door, double door might be. I might get that.
It's a hawk.
Yeah, let me get does that thing roll down to the, let me just see if I can get that down to the menu. Oh, there we go. All right. Now here's something that, this is a picture my mother never saw. So, that's me on the top of I used to mountain climb a lot. We never used to use ropes. So I'm on about a 1,500 foot drop there. Yeah, those back double doors might be glaring a bit too. This is a set of mountains called the Glasshouse Mountains, and this is actually Steve Irwin's zoo was at the foothills of these mountains, and we used to go climbing these. They've actually banned climbing these mountains now because there's been too many falls. I'm sort of jumping around. This is where I grew up. This is the beach I grew up on. This is called Mooloolaba Beach, and I spent many a time here. There's a lighthouse here, right there, and that's called Point Cartwright. And the boats would come out, and that's where my cousins used to bring their boats out from that point. And we used to surf in here, and sometimes when the surf was so big, it would break over them walls into this bay. And of course, us crazy kids would be out the back catching these waves into the bay. This is the lighthouse close up here. There we go. Point Cartwright. So this looks over the head. I mean, the sunsets there are incredible. It's just such a... Yeah, sorry, mate.
Talk louder, Jason.
Yep.
Slowly and loud.
Yeah. Yep. This is the same beach. So after school, it was always... Everybody went down to the beach and hung out. We had bonfires at night and after school. So there was the incentive to skip school a lot because we had this. These are what they call pandanus palms. They grow wild along the beach.
Is this near Brisbane?
Yep, just about an hour and a half north of Brisbane drive. I'm trying to think if I can get this thing to roll. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I'm getting better already. And same beach.
Do you have a winter there?
We do, but it's pretty mild. I'm sort of in what they call subtropical. It's not The further north you go in Australia, the hotter it gets. So we're sort of central, so it may get down to the 40s at night in the winter time, but it always gets up to mid-60s at least in the winter. These are those same mountains we used to climb. This is a sort of a distant shot. This is inland. So that mountain you saw me sitting on was that one right there. We used to climb their mountains. There's about 6 of them. And they're actually what they call volcanic cores, where the inside of the volcano remains and the outside erodes away. This is one of our local wildlife. A kangaroo. So kangaroos are everywhere. They're just like deer here. This is at a local school actually, so they like to get onto golf courses because they like the good grass. Sometimes the males will get a little bit stroppy if you come up to them and they're in breeding season. They'll kind of stand up in their haunches at you, but most of the time they'll just run away. There's one of the little baby here, there's a joey. That's a little joey. And this is my niece, the one that passed away. She was 12 at the time when she was in a car accident, and that was her little dog Jewel. So this was the picture she sent me because I'd started painting a little bit, and she goes, I've been painting too. So she did this colouring of a kangaroo. So that was the weird story about Kangaroo Katie's. It was my first job in America, which is kind of weird. This fella here is the original crocodile hunter. That's Steve Irwin's dad. So I went up and visited him. When Steve passed away, his dad was sort of, I would say, well, not forced out, but they pushed him, they kind of said, you know what, he bought his own property, he wanted to do his own thing. There was a lot of clashes between the families, so he went and done his own thing and bought his own property. So I went up to his property to visit him one day and gave him a print of Steve's portrait, which he'd never seen before. This is another picture of me rock climbing. That's on top of a mountain on a place called Girraween National Park, which is in the next state down. But yeah, a lot of times my parents never got to see these pictures, so they would have killed me. Yeah. I go to Hawaii quite a bit. Since I've been married, we go to Hawaii nearly every other year surfing. So this is me at a little town called Haleiwa on the North Shore. Sort of a really early morning, checking out the surf before we go in. And another one of me, this is down near Waikiki. About to go paddle out the back there's the famous Diamond Head there. This next photo is the time we gave the stadium. We went to the stadium for the presentation of Steve's portrait. So they brought it through these back double doors, and that's sort of the stadium there. So we had the crocodile show in front of us, and now that portrait is actually at Terry's house, his wife's house. What's that? Yeah, that's like a giclée or a print from the original. Yeah. So this is when we handed over this is when we had the Redskins gathering. So that's Santana Moss there. He's laughing there, but he wasn't laughing after I gave him his prize. But yeah, that's the original. So it's like 6 foot by 5 foot, the original. This was the picture that we sent to President Clinton of him and his dog. So Buddy was a pup there. But yeah, the sad thing about it, he got hit by the truck, but I think that was his best friend at the time. But yeah, some more pictures come. Oh, this is another story. This is a kind of an interesting story. I got to know this family in Australia. Kind of a sad story. This is their son. Their son was abducted and went missing, and this went on for about 8 years. He was never found. And just by chance, they got some leads, and they tracked it to this one guy who they finally caught and found out that he had actually murdered the boy. So they started a foundation called the Daniel Morecambe Foundation. So I did this portrait for them, which hangs at their headquarters in Australia. So every year they have a big fundraiser. They just had their annual fundraiser last week. So every time they do a sort of a PR thing, this is an Australian-wide thing now. It's become so big. So this is my parents, and we got a picture with the parents that we gave them the portrait that day. That was about 7 years ago. I do a lot of sports pictures. This is Alex Kovechkin. Got to meet him at one of the local sports bars and showed him a picture. This here was a portrait I did of a guy who was actually buried at Arlington Cemetery. He was a fairly highly decorated soldier, but his daughter had me do this for him. And the Australian soldiers, this is one that was sent back to Australia. This fellow's name was Darren Smith, and him and his friend, who's not in that picture, and the dog were killed by an IED. And it was sort of the first time a soldier and his dog had been killed, in that fashion. So his parents have got this picture of him, and it's kind of hard to see. His son that's his son wearing his father's hat. I sort of imposed that on top of the painting. And then there's another one. This guy here was photographs that the families, they pick out the picture they like. I sort of leave it up to them. This guy was a commando. He was a fairly, there was a fairly small group of commandos in Australia that was sent there, and he was killed by a sniper. His mother's got this picture. Try and scoot through these a little bit. There's a lot of pictures, but so a lot of dogs. This is in Kensington. This is me working on. I'm not sure if you know that when you go down Metropolitan past the train lines, there's a dog park there.
And that's my dog.
And that's
she's just fine.
yeah, she's. So yeah, she's. Yeah, she had to sign a waiver first, but yeah. So there's a bunch of dog portraits on these old pillars down there on Metropolitan. I was down there at night time sketching these, and this sort of became bigger than I thought. It just kept going. I get addicted.
I think Sophie's fine too.
Sophie's fine too. Yeah, she's fine.
Yeah.
She's put on a little weight since then, but she's good. Yeah. This is a kind of a, this K9, his name was Kit, and it was from a department in Boston. 3 guys were sent on a mission it was a domestic violence call, and they got ambushed by the guy. The guy knew they were coming and was hiding in the bushes and shot and killed the dog. And then he shot the 2 officers, and the 2 officers got badly injured in their arms, and they've since had to retire. And there was 1 officer left, and he had his dog, and the dog spotted the guy, pointed him out, and he took him out. And so the owner of the guy who retired, this is his dog. He's got this portrait now. He's up in Boston. These are my 2 dogs on that same mural down at these dogs have since passed away. I've got 2 new ones.
They were old.
Yeah, they were old. Yeah, they were old. Yeah, yeah. So it kind of died. I mean, it stopped after a while. After about 7, it kind of stopped. I had a guy from a radio station wanted me to do a call in one day, and I described him. He says, tell me about your dog portraits. He wanted to hear about the dogs passing away. And he says, I've got an ex-wife I want you to paint. That was a grease man. That was this is an old portrait I did of my niece and my nephew and my brother's nephew in the backyard of where we used to live. We lived on a canal, and we used to fish in a canal, and that was a great life. This is this painting here. I won a big competition with this one. It was I was up in Pennsylvania, and I just happened to have my camera, and they had like a reenactment group up there of American Civil War and all that. And this guy was giving his horse a bath because it was so hot. And I just snapped a photo of him, so I painted it, and I stuck it in a show up here in Montgomery County, and it won the prize. So a lady came in, and she ended up buying it. This is a portrait of a Maori girl. Maori is a native New Zealanders. she's on the beach there in Australia, but she was, a friend of hers had commissioned me to do this for her. With the hardest part was doing this uniform, with the Maori uniform. She's got the traditional tattoos and everything. This fellow was a Vietnam vet, and his wife had passed away a few months ago, and so he had me do an old portrait of them, an old photo that he'd sent me the photo to copy from. You may or may not have seen my trailer. I had an old trailer that was decorated with Australian sort of animals and famous people, and it was, these are some of the figures: Yvonne Goolagong, there's an Aboriginal guy, Greg Norman, some of the animals. This is the other side. It was a small trailer, and I since bought a bigger trailer, and the thing is, I wanted to sell this, but I didn't want anyone to take the pictures off, so I put it on an Australian Facebook page. Anyway, I got a call from the Australian Embassy in Washington, and so they wanted to buy it. So now it's parked down at the Embassy in Australia, Embassy of Australia on Massachusetts Avenue, in the garage. This is the infamous log where the county wanted to close us down. So I'm sort of starting it there. I've got the bigger chainsaw. So that's sort of the start of the eagle's wings, and then that's when they started coming out and harassing us. This is an old picture of Muhammad Ali, and the guy wanted me to do it on a piece of wood that was shaped as a glove. So we cut out a big piece of plywood and put it on a glove, like make it look like a glove. Let's see. Oh, you might have seen the bears in Kensington. They're at St. Paul Park. Tracy organised this. We had some local logs lined up and we put them down there. So it's a bench you can sit at. It's had some repairs done since, but they're right down there at St. Paul Park. That's in there, yep. So it's almost, probably 85% of it's chainsaw. The rest is like hand tools, chisels, grinders, sanders. That one of the eagle that the county was trying to get rid of, that's how it finished up. It's right off Colesville Road. It's about 12 feet tall, and it's still out there. And this is a kookaburra from Australia, a famous bird. And oddly enough, an Indian guy bought that one. He wanted it. And in Rockville, this is a big owl. A guy took a cherry tree down, and it's still alive, but it's actually growing out of this trunk. But the owl was carved into one side that was cut off. It's about 12 feet up. This is one of the soldiers, what they have with the boots and the gun with the soldiers. This is made from a piece of oak. We had the boots and the gun and the helmet. That's on display at a gun store actually around here. I'm not sure if you've seen the fox down at Flynn Park. The foxes, that's me working on it. They're there, and then the same fox. Someone saw that fox, and they lived in Rockville, and they wanted to. This fox is about, I would say, that's about an 18-foot tall stump. So I've got a scaffold there. I could just reach with two layers of scaffold. And it's got a raccoon head, same as the one in Flynn Park. This is a heron. A fellow wanted a heron done from a piece of locust tree. Now this is an interesting one. A guy called me, said, I've got a stump in my yard I want you to look at. So I went by there. This is when it's partially been done. Anyway, it was 22 feet tall. It was a willow oak that was just about ready to fall on his house. And he wanted a woodpecker and a hawk. So I had scaffolding set up, and so this was sort of it was a pretty hard job. It took me about 2 months. That's me working on it there. And actually Fox News came out and did a story on that one. It was on the local Fox News. We had them come up and do it came on the 6 o'clock news that night, and we put it on Nextdoor. And the weird thing is, Nextdoor, I'm not sure if you heard of Nextdoor, the app. And my wife kept telling me, you've got to put a picture on Nextdoor. And I says, I do not want to go on Nextdoor. There's too many weird people on there. You know, people complaining about blowers, or someone would say, oh, there's a weird car in my neighbourhood or something like that. You know, someone's got New York tags and they're coming down my street. It's like, so what? So I said, I'm not putting anything. She said, just put one picture. So I put one picture, and that's where I got this job from. So when Fox News came out, I reposted that story onto Nextdoor, and I got like 1,000 hits in one day. People calling me, it's like, I have a stump I want you to look at. So as long as it's less than 20 feet, you know. So it was, and this is an interesting one. This fellow lives in College Park, and he wanted a lighthouse. And it's actually cemented into the ground, and he put a bench around it. And it's actually a solid, those windows are burnt in with a blowtorch. I often use a blowtorch to colour them. It's just burnt, they're not real windows, they're just burnt in. But it took quite a while, that one. This fella here is a peacock in Chevy Chase, and it was about 18-foot tall tree. And it was a little bit, precarious, because it was actually on a slope like that. So I had to put chocks under the legs, and the thing would shake all the time. And it was a little bit tricky. This is another dog portrait. This one's still alive. An old boxer from the beach. And I'm not sure if you've heard of Washington Waldorf School is in down there on Sangamore Street in DC. So their mascot, sometimes I do mascots for schools too. This was a red-tailed hawk, and he's about this tall. So they cut a tree down, and they had me come out and carve it on site, and we moved it to outside their gymnasium. These are just some of the other. Oh, this is interesting. I hadn't done any dog portraits in coffee, so this fellow wanted it done in coffee, and he was an old bulldog. I'm trying to get rid of these bottom things, but I also teamed up with a company called Rock and Roll. It's a Rock and Roll for Children Foundation, and every year they have a concert in Silver Spring at the Fillmore. And they have me bring a piece of artwork in, and they auction it off. So often we'll do they usually have a headline guest. Like one year they had Ann Wilson from Heart. We've had Colin Hay from Men at Work. They've had different artists. So usually they'll have me paint an artist, and they auction it off to the highest bidder. And these are some of the artists I'd painted for those auctions. Santana, and John Mellencamp. I always enjoyed American westerns, and I was always fascinated with Clint Eastwood, and I've done a few of him. There's one hanging over there from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I always enjoyed the old American westerns. This was Aretha Franklin from another auction I went to. So I get bored real easy. So I kind of I try to chop. If I see a piece of artwork, or I try a discipline of artwork, I've tried a lot of different mediums, but portraits have sort of been my main thing. Whether it's sports people or private commissions, I've been pretty lucky. I've had enough work to sort of. I have a regular job, of course, which is from Monday to Friday, but working here at Town of Kensington has been good, because it's I get off at 3 o'clock, so I've still got time in the afternoon to paint or carve, and on weekends it's free too. But I had a landscaping business for about 14 years, and that pretty much just wore me out. I couldn't paint, I couldn't do anything, so I was just sort of looking for a way out of that business. And when 2008 came along, and they had that sort of a financial meltdown out here, I sort of knew the writing was on the wall then, because all of a sudden there was 1 million landscape trailers on Connecticut Avenue. All of a sudden everybody became a landscaper, because there was no construction going on, so all these guys went out and bought equipment. And people were cutting each other's throats on prices, and it's like, I wasn't getting any of the big jobs anymore. So, and then at the time I was doing some contract work for the city of Kensington, and I was approached to sort of, to start work with them, and that was back in 2011. And so for me, it came at a good time because I was pretty much looking to get out of the business. Plus, getting older, you need the benefits. And that's definitely helped out in the last few years with the various health issues I've had. Nothing serious, but I've definitely, the health insurance has definitely helped me out. That's why I was supposed to do this about 2-3 weeks ago, but I came out with shingles. And I got over that a couple of weeks ago, so that was a bit of an ordeal. But and then I had shoulder surgery about 1.5 years ago. I was surfing, and of course, being I'm 57, and I still think I was 21. And I was surfing in Hawaii, and it was a pretty big day. It was, there was overhead waves, and it was the last day in Hawaii. It's like, you know what? Let's just go for it. I took off on a wave. And I came off and I hit the water and I got sucked back over the wave, and then I landed wrong on my arm and basically tore this shoulder, tore the bicep tendon, tore the rotator. And I came to work. Actually, I was still working, and then I finally said, I've got to get an MRI. And they said, no, you're going to have to go in and get surgery. So that was all done, and it's good now. It's been actually stronger than this arm now. But yeah, I've learnt my lesson as far as like taking chances with the waves anymore. But I still surf. I go down to the Outer Banks quite a bit. Just recently we had Hurricane Ernesto in August, and I went to Indian River, but they'd closed it off because the waves were breaking onto the road, and so I went to Assateague and surfed down there, and that was actually quite good. It was a little bit big, but it was doable. But yeah, my wife, she's half Japanese. Her mother was Japanese American, lived in Hawaii, and she has a dog walking business, so she walks dogs around the area. But her mother was Japanese, father was American, and her mother was from a family of 15 kids, and they lived in Hawaii right next to near the Arizona Memorial. And actually they were there when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, but fortunately for the Japanese in Hawaii, they never got interned like the ones they did on the mainland. So her uncle actually joined up and was with the Nisei soldiers, the 442nd, and he ended up getting the Congressional Medal in 2000. So we go to Hawaii quite a bit. She's got a lot of relatives still there, and I've actually done coffee shows in Hawaii on the North Shore. I've teamed up with a coffee shop on the North Shore and do a display there, and of course I sort of write the surf trip off as a business trip, surf at the same time. But it's been a good journey. This will be my retirement job, and who knows what next medium I'll get into. But I enjoy Kensington. I love Kensington. It's been a very good town to me. I've had a lot of help from locals, and the local support here has been really good, and I find more so in the States, and especially in there, they definitely support the arts very well. If you want to pursue your art, they'll be right behind you. And Tracy's been good because she's had me do. I've got about 6 statues in town, so she's had me commissioned to do a few.
He has 8 statues
Yeah.
in town, 6 of which the town of Kensington commissioned.
Yes.
You pay. We don't ask for free. So, and then we have the dog murals and the dog parks. So
yeah, and that's sort of
really appreciate Jason's talent.
we sort of have an ongoing thing. So as things, actually David Gregg, the statue is behind Safeway over there at the little park here. And of course there's ongoing issues with weather, and because it's wood, things need to be restored. And I went by there the other day and I noticed his feet were a little soft. So I had to chop his feet off, and I'm rebuilding his legs right now. So David Gregg was an interesting character. He was still cutting trees when he was 90 years old, and he retired, and he passed away about 3-4 months ago, maybe a bit longer. He was 94, and he was Yeah, he was one of the original workers with Asplund. Asplund is the big company that does the trees around here. And he said he started with them in 1948 and he never did anything else but trees for 70 odd years and pretty much worked every day. So, but he got to see it. We unveiled it with him over there one day and with his signature blue and black, coat on. But yeah, questions. Anyone have questions? Sure. Yeah.
Jason, I'm dying to ask you this question, so I'm glad you have time. It seems to me that the beauty of one of the beautiful aspects of your work, are the way you capture the soul in the eyes of either a person or an animal. And I'm just wondering how long it took you, or what kind of process you went through to just hone in on the.
Yeah, I kind of, for me, I'm just really observant with people and everything, animals, whatever I'm looking at, I'm looking right into it. Like I get ribbed by my co-worker all the time. Like I'm looking at birds all the time. I'll be out there, I'm in a work truck and I've got my phone out and it's like, hey, check that out, Joe, it's a Kentucky warbler. I'm looking up at the sky like this. He's out there doing work. He's like, we're working here. It's like, but when I study something, I really look into it because I'm sort of my own worst critic. It's either you get a certain look or you don't. And I'll try and rework stuff. The good thing about oil paintings is you can rework stuff. It's a little bit more forgiving. Coffee's a little less forgiving. But getting the character of the eyes and the face is key. And I sort of start from there out. And because you don't necessarily have to get everything exact. And painting from a photo is kind of a bit deceiving because they're two different mediums. And whatever colour you see in a photo is not what you're going to put into a painting. You're going to use totally different colours. And that's what drove me crazy. I mean, I'm glad I wasn't like a drinker because I would paint something and say, well, that's the colour there. But if you put it on a canvas, it didn't look the same. So you had to find that colour that made it look real as a painting versus a photo. And that's what drove me crazy for years. I just couldn't figure that out. And finally I was like, why didn't I think of this earlier? It's just all very, very much trial and error. Yeah. What's that? Oh, I have a studio in the back of my house. It's like a 14 by 10 foot shed. I basically made out of like throw out materials. It's got a wood stove in there, stereo, a pretty wide variety of whiskies, rums. I find if I have a couple of drinks, I paint better. I paint I don't know. I mean, I don't drink a lot. I have a couple, and if I don't have to drive somewhere, I find it kind of loosens you up a bit because sometimes you can overthink paintings. You become too careful, and you kind of get a bit intimidated. And having a couple of little shots of whiskey kind of to loosen you up a little bit. Like you mean?
I mean, what life is like, it's a better kind of life. I like Western light.
Yeah, definitely. I like the warm colours. The Western lights are good. Just give you that warm colour. Because I don't do a lot of landscapes. That's the next thing I want to get into is landscapes. I am so excited about I teamed up with a guy called Jay Fleming, who's one of the real key, big photographers on the Eastern Shore. And he told me, he says, listen, if you want to use any of my pictures for your paintings, we'll work out a deal. Because I just can't, I mean, for me, the Chesapeake Bay and these areas are just so huge, and you just can't do it in a few days. I want to get some of the images of the old fishermen, the boats, the sunsets, the water birds. I want to do some local stuff more. So, I need a 48-hour day is basically what I need. I just don't have the time. Between what? Yeah.
Where is this?
Oh, that's the Key Bridge. Yep, I was down at, I'm trying to think where that was, that spot taken. Might have been from one of the lookouts where you could see it. That's an oil painting. And that one of my beach where I lived in Australia, it's a kind of a mouthful. It's called Mooloolaba Beach. But but that's my wife in the red sarong and my sister in the blue sarong. And I drove them crazy. I had this box of like clothes, and they don't wear these clothes. I said, I want you to, can you try these dresses? I want some colour. So I had them out on the beach taking photos, and they're just basically sitting there. It's like, are you finished? Like, waiting for me to get done. So I've just tried a lot of different ideas. My mother was a bit of a painter. She painted a lot. My father and my mother and my sister were musicians too. They played in a band, and they actually did gigs in Australia. They travelled quite a bit with that. They played a lot of bluegrass and sort of older style Australian country music. So me, my two sisters, and my parents are sort of artistically inclined. My older brother was, he works on aircraft. He was a fairly qualified guy. He worked on instruments on things like Learjets, Gulfstreams, all the private jets. But I sort of was I was the one who was probably the least successful in schoolwork. So I was terrible at school. One of the teachers I went to school with, Mr. Hastorf, interesting story about him. It's a little bit risque, but I would be sitting in class at the table, and I'd be sitting there doodling pictures of my teacher. And this guy, he looked like a caveman. He was a big guy, big beard. And, being that age, I'd be sitting there drawing pictures of him, of course. Couldn't help it. I was drawing an appendage on him. And he's sitting there. He came over my shoulder one day. He's like, well, what do we got here? Mr. Swain. He said, what are we working on today? I was like, just some schoolwork. He's like, why don't you get up and show the rest of the class? I was like, no, I'll be fine. I'll just sit here. He goes, no, get up. He says, otherwise you're going to get detention. I said, all right. So he said, Mr. Swain wants to show you something today. So hold up this picture of him. Of course he's got nothing on, standing there like this. Anyway, he said, I'll give you this much. He said, at least you're generous. He said, but you're still on detention. So anyway, the detention was you had to spend your whole lunch hour picking up trash around the school. So me and my friends always had this bright idea that we'd go get your trash can and go to another trash can, pull the trash out of that can, put it in your can, so it was full. So I stayed in touch with him for years, and after he retired, I called him up and he said, Swainy, how's those pictures going? And I showed him. He was surprised. He said, I guess you had to become something. And sadly, but he retired from teaching, and the week he retired, he went to his favourite beach location, went out to go jump in the water to go for a swim, and he passed away of a heart attack. First week of retirement. I was so bummed. So, yeah.
How many months of your time are going forward? How many months of your time are already spoken for by commissions?
I can always fit things in. So, I have about 2 or 3 jobs right now that I have to get finished, but I've always got time for something. But I've probably got about 2 or 3 months of work to do. But luckily, they're not time sensitive. So, yeah.
Jason, when you see a tree trunk, how do you decide what it's going to become? First of all, the customer wants to pick something out, I'll let them do that, because pretty much if you've got a straight up and down trunk, it could be anything. And what I do is I go onto that site, Pinterest. Have you heard of Pinterest? Mm-hmm. And basically anything you can think of as far as arts and statues or animals, it's on there. And I'll get some ideas of forms and shapes and that, because basically it's shapes. I work in shapes. Like, a bird has got its wings and head, so I'll say, okay, head is a box, shoulders is a box, tail is another box. So I work in boxes, and then you just kind of shave it down from there. Because the way you're using boxes, it keeps everything symmetrical too, because animals are so symmetrical. Like what you got on this side has to be on this side exactly, versus two-dimensional, you're working with one surface. But yeah, I can kind of see it. If they give you a picture, I can kind of look at it. And sometimes the wood dictates what you do too. Sometimes you'll get in there and find out, oh man, this has got a big knot in it somewhere, or it's got a piece that might be rotten in there, you've got to dig out. And I'm working on a big eagle at the moment in Laytonsville. It's about an 8-foot bald eagle on Brink Road. And I'll finish it next week, but it was quite a challenge because it was Very hard piece of wood, plus it wasn't like the perfect piece of wood. I had to chop a lot out of it. So, but it's just about done. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Things in conclusion. First of all, this is from Villages of Kensington.
Oh man, a
And,
shirt. All right.
And a shirt. That's
Thank you.
That's a